Welcome to Etherworld, a digital realm bursting with secrets and magical technology. 10 years ago, Etherworld launched as a dating game for women, but it turned out that tons of guys were the ones really playing it instead. The game brings you a huge mix of heroes, ranging from super strong champions you can easily control right down to fragile fighters that are incredibly hard to master. Among them stood a notorious nobody who always performed terribly and made things impossibly hard. A pair of hands tightened until the knuckles cracked, and a challenge-filled voice asked, "Should I begin?" Beckel, that strange one with his eyes locked on the screen like a gamer in the middle of a big game. Outside the window, the tall buildings glowed in the brilliant sunset. Bakuzale took a sip of coffee, scrolled through the game forum, and stumbled upon a bunch of strange new posts that left him surprised. Players flooded the forums with angry posts, claiming a dark dragon had appeared to steal their data and lock them out of the game. Busuzel frowned, wondering if this wasn't a typical dating game since there was no male hero to pair up with at the end. A top player named Bunny Princess shared that the dragon could absorb almost all magic with 99% resistance, then let it out again and again. The ceramic cup clicked onto the table as Bakuzel wondered if he was facing a final boss. He grumbled that taking away magic in a world built on it made no sense, and deleting a character was clearly a major mistake. Ah, it must be this, as the screen showed a massive magic dragon called Dark Magic Dragon 13th Moon of the Night, and with one click, the story finally began. In the realm of Ether, a shadowy group known as the Dark Sorcerers Guild plotted to twist the world's fate by opening a sinister portal called the Persona Gate. When the Dark Sorcerers Guild opened the Persona Gate across the land, a roaring shadow beast burst through the sky, bringing terror to the world. Becca stared at the screen in shock, then smirked at the ruin of the game world, and clicked the button to nurture it anyway. The screen flashed with a dangerous question: do you want to battle the Dark Magic Dragon? And the answer was easy to make. Beckel's eyes sharpened, so I decided to unleash every control skill I'd mastered over the last decade as Busail, a lone swordsman in the virtual world, bravely faced the colossal Dark Dragon. Let me tell you a bit about Beku's character in the game. In a world where everyone could wield magic, Bekus was the only one who couldn't, so people shunned him and left his character behind. He was pushed so far to the side that he felt like nothing more than a forgettable background character in someone else's story. But don't think Bekus was completely useless, since he could still cast one kind of magic. A shadowy dragon roared, snapping its jaws wide to spew a roaring stream of purple magic that tore everything apart. Anger exploded with such power that it swallowed the whole sky. Even with the world crumbling around her, Becky stared right back with eyes that wouldn't blink. A cold smirk crossed his face as the life-or-death fight finally started. The good-for-nothing darted away like lightning, dodging the Dark Magic Dragon's deadly strike before shooting upward to unleash a counterattack with his legendary blink skill. With sharp purple eyes, he flashed by in a dazzling blur of light, moving like a ghost through chaos with terrifying speed before landing gracefully with his sword ready, every move charged with chilling determination. His face was tight and his golden eyes burned with fighting spirit, making him look like the very definition of resilience even as the Dark Magic Dragon loomed overhead without a hint of fear, threatening the whole sky, but the key to winning this fight was Becky's special skill called Blink. With this power, they could blink a dizzying 3 to 10 meters away in a flash, vanishing and reappearing in the blink of an eye. It was a cruel joke that the movement went anywhere at all, because a single accidental crash into something would be instantly killed by the speed and shove. And let's not forget the long wait to use it again, the massive mana cost, and the 2-second freeze that followed, a move anyone could learn but few would dare to try. But there was one difference: a spark of light flashed in the young man's tired eyes. In the game, Bakuyol had perfected Blink so completely that he could steer it, limit its reach, and never get stunned again. With no mana to burn, he treated Blink like a simple move, turning it into a weapon he could wield. He was totally hooked on this character whose only trick was that everything hinged entirely on how the player controlled him. 10 years later, he was the only one who could fight with his body while the Dark Magic Dragon kept roaring and striking with deadly force. The good-for-nothing stayed tough, slipping past deadly blows to dodge and strike back at every chance. With a sharp spin, he hit the ground with a dull thud, and the useless one was ready for the next move. His face looked strangely calm, yet the fire of battle still burned deep in his eyes, and he would not give up this fight. The victory shout confirmed the last boss, the 13th Moon, was finally gone, proving he had done the impossible. The player stared in disbelief, asking himself if he had really just defeated the final boss as a small, surprised smile appeared on his face. Even though he knew he held ancient relic-grade equipment, he couldn't stop doubting himself, knowing deep down he was still just a good-for-nothing character, his hazy eyes fixed on the screen as he pondered. With everything finally settled, his fingers danced across the keys with a sound of relief and satisfaction. He meant to brag about killing the dark dragon on the forum, and the glowing post button seemed to be waiting just for his proud update. A sharp beep shattered the silence as the screen turned red, telling you that you triggered a bad ending and destroyed 90% of Etherworld, leaving him frozen in shock. In the middle of broken data, another line showed up, but since you were the one who got closest to the true ending, you couldn't help but wonder what on earth was going on as you felt completely confused. We hope you find the true ending before the final message plays, and he screams in terror as the world seems to collapse. A bright light washed over everything and then disappeared, leaving just the empty gaming desk and 2 glowing screens in the dark room. Aha! He slipped away with a last gasp, his wide eyes staring blankly into the pale golden light of his panic. He woke up feeling heavy in an old outfit, lying on the cold ground. He gripped his head hard, trying to make sense of it all, and muttered, "What the hell is going on?" because he was completely baffled by what he was seeing. A freezing gust of wind blew past, making him shiver, and he found himself in a vast, strange room with window frames carved with intricate designs. He scanned the room, bewildered by the impossible sight until he spotted a shattered mirror in the corner that suddenly sparked a glimmer of hope. He slowly crawled toward it, staring hard at the broken mirror until a strange feeling took hold, and though the glass was shattered, he saw his own clear face staring back with wide, amazed eyes. Suddenly, a familiar ding from the game system shattered the quiet. He slumped down, and right before his eyes, a quest popped up, Chapter 1, Escape the Pursuers. The young man stared at the quest board, confused, then stood up and looked at the words on the board, "Begin your sailing quest on this island," and suddenly, his entire world felt like it had turned upside down. "No way," he muttered, his pale golden eyes going wide as he couldn't believe what was happening. His hands flew across his body in a frantic search, desperate to find something familiar he could hold onto for proof. A tiny flash of light jumped into his eyes when he finally found what he was looking for, like he just discovered the most important clue in the whole world. He pulled out the letter and knew without a doubt that it was his admission to Stella Academy. The young man swallowed hard against his tight throat, disbelief gripping him as he clutched his head in despair, wondering why Beckiel had to be chosen out of all the others in this ether world. His eyes were heavy with gloom and confusion as he faced his new reality, wondering if this game had more than one ending. A sudden thought struck him like a bolt of lightning, or maybe there is a true ending waiting to be found after 10 years of silence, and that question opened a mysterious new door. He clenched his jaw, pushing aside the fog in his mind. Damn it, now's not the time for silly thoughts, as the gray-purple-haired boy spun around with fiery eyes, remembering he had to rush to the window just like in the game, his face full of worry as his yellow eyes scanned the snowy view outside. Outside, in a forest of deep white snow, a group of cloaked figures moved closer, and suddenly, pursuers crashed into the cabin as someone screamed, "Where did that bastard go?" He flinched and pressed himself hard against the window frame, his heart pounding and his face tense as he realized they were finally there. A scruffy bearded man who led the chasing pack suddenly noticed something. He pointed toward the lone wooden house standing all by itself in the snowy forest. The old leader roared at his men to break in and search, leaving the gray-haired young man inside turning pale with cold sweat as he realized running away was not the answer. He squeezed his fists tight, feeling useless as he thought he couldn't fight them, right until a familiar sound popped up like a game notification and changed everything. A skill panel popped into view, revealing that he could now use instant teleportation, and his eyes went wide in shock as it suddenly became true. Without a second thought, he unleashed his power, vanishing instantly into a blaze of golden light as Beckiel reappeared, relying on his lifetime of grueling practice to use instant teleportation as his only escape since his body could no longer hold on to its magic. Snow covered the ground in a thick white blanket when a new skill popped into his mind, instant teleportation, his only way out. Becky clenched his teeth, worry filling his eyes as he wondered how to use this skill in the real world when before it was just a simple press of a button on a keyboard and mouse. The gray-purple-haired boy launched himself across the endless white snow like a flying arrow, pouring every bit of his strength into fleeing the hunter behind him. Behind him, a pack of gray-cloaked figures sped through the snow, closing the gap to make sure their prey didn't get away. He flinched and looked back, his eyes wide with horror as he realized the people chasing him were much closer than he thought. He spun around, fists tight, face pale, as he realized they were almost at the wooden house and his time was up. He clenched his jaw until it ached, sweat soaking his skin as he knew there was no time left, yet he refused to give in to the crushing despair. Busushio's sleepy yellow eyes suddenly snapped open with fierce determination, and he was ready to take a huge risk on a life-or-death gamble. Suddenly, a loud noise startled the two cloaked leaders as they turned to see where Beckis had vanished. Becca stumbled and fell into the white snow, and shouts rang out, "He's there! Hurry, catch him!" A group of cloaked figures chased him relentlessly across the snow, their boots crunching urgently as they shouted, "Don't let him get away! Stop right there!" Byuzu sprinted forward with sweat flying off him, knowing that the first step of the tutorial was to use teleportation to escape his pursuers. He gasped for air, his heavy breaths mixing with the biting cold as the world around him blurred into a dizzying swirl of wind and rushing footsteps. Bakuzio sprinted for his life, knowing the magic-booted hunters were too fast, so he had to time his teleportation perfectly to slip away. He forced himself to stay calm despite his rapid breathing, repeating to himself that he'd faced this before and there was no room for panic now. Byuzel's eyes sparkled with certainty, for his gut feeling that the moment had finally arrived was louder than any smart math. The pursuer roared, "You bastard! Stop right there," but Bakuzel kept running, moving so fast through the white snow that he seemed to be tearing through the wind itself. In a sudden gasp, he clenched his teeth as the heavy weight of their rapid pursuit pressed down on every step. If his teleportation wasn't perfectly timed, he could crash into something and die instantly. The old cloaked leader swung his sword, blasting a brilliant magical light as he screamed, "I'll send you to hell. Die, or you face death right now." But it was him holding the power to teleport instantly, ready to change everything as he focused and began to chant. In a flash, Beckus vanished, leaving the stunned pursuer behind as he had just escaped the deadly blade. His eyes flared with sudden light, and he shouted, he did it, because the teleportation spell had finally gotten him to safety. A bright smile broke across his sweaty face as he shouted, "I did it," in pure joy after surviving a deadly moment, leaving the cloaked group stunned and wondering if he was a mage who had just teleported. The old leader roared to calm his team, explaining that instant teleportation always leaves them stunned for 2 seconds, but his words died in his throat as horror filled his eyes at what he suddenly saw. Beale didn't even blink, he shot forward like a speeding arrow, leaving the shocked chasers far behind. He zoomed across the white snow far faster than anyone thought possible, vanishing into the cold mist. He breathed hard with a determined look, whispering to himself that he had to be super careful because getting away wasn't finished yet. In the snow-filled forest with rocks and trees everywhere, he saw a way to use the land to throw his pursuers off his trail. He sprinted across the blinding white snow, gasping for air, knowing that anyone who couldn't teleport instantly would be trapped there forever. 99% of Bakayo players stumble through this tutorial, and even the lucky 1% who make it past can't dodge while teleporting without stopping. The timer hit 0, a brilliant light burst outward, and he leaped into the darkness, using instant teleportation to vanish in a flash. With a flawless teleportation, he landed gently in the snow and took every single step with perfect precision. From far away, the man in the gray cloak stared in shock, wondering if the other guy was crazy for teleporting instantly right there. The leader roared at his men to bring the mages forward and strike from afar, and instantly 3 cloaked figures stepped up, magic building in their hands for the assault. He turned his head back with wide, shocked eyes, wondering if they'd use magic and feeling a sudden chill of unease. For the second part of our lesson, we had to pop instantly to a new spot just as magic arrows were flying straight at us. He ground his teeth because what I once dodged on the screen is now a very real danger. A brilliant blue light suddenly burst forth, marking an instant shift. A system alert sounds as your special Manalik body form kicks in. Alongside his new sixth sense and the ability to move faster, he also used the extra strength his body had gained. Suddenly, a whooshing sound echoed as a storm of green magic arrows shot at him, but his eyes flashed blue with intense focus. He zoomed past like a gust of wind, leaving behind bright pink and purple trails, and with terrifying speed, he ducked under every arrow that flew toward him. His face was tight with strain as his determined eyes stared right through the bright purple glow, knowing that every second counted. He let out a shaky breath as sweat dripped down his face, knowing that while this was a close call, the chase wasn't finished. Without even a moment's pause, he poured every ounce of his strength into a dash that felt like flying across the white snow, tearing through the cold air of the majestic mountains as he raced toward his final life-or-death stretch. He breathed hard and his chest heaved with exhaustion, yet his pale yellow eyes still glowed with a strange, stubborn strength. He stood before a terrifying drop to a sea of shaky floating stones, where he had to use his teleportation skill one last time to get across. The wind screamed while snow blinded them, turning the deep hole in the ground into a giant scar that ate up every sound. He stood right at the edge of the deadly drop, eyes locked tight on the path ahead, knowing he had to land his teleportation move perfectly with no room for mistakes. If the tutorial succeeded, mages would arrive to save him, and that tiny sliver of hope was all he needed to hold on to. Crossing that deep drop needed a teleportation cancellation so perfect it had to happen in less than a tenth of a second, because even a tiny slip meant instant death. About 20 rocks hung in the air, each one a chance to cross or a trap that could kill you. It's easy to say, but in just a tenth of a second, you can be separated from life or death. He clenched his teeth and cursed the person who made this crazy tutorial, wondering if it was a challenge or a death sentence. He kept his cool, knowing that with his gaming experience, this problem was still something he could handle. His eyes suddenly hardened with a cold realization that the danger wasn't the hard skill itself, but what was waiting for him next. From far away, the figures in gray cloaks seemed to appear out of nowhere, their eyes looking right through the air to fixate on their target. He twisted his neck to see the ghosts of death closing in, their presence a shock he hadn't expected. Though the gap was just 100 meters, his teleportation power was still on cooldown, leaving him trapped with no way to escape. With the wind howling across the frozen peaks, the young man with gray-purple hair stood hidden behind a snow-covered rock, his drowsy eyes scanning the desolate landscape for a chance to take out those chasing him so he could survive. He confessed that this was a reckless move, for someone who had never faced real battle dared to challenge them. If this were a game, the rules would stop him from attacking, but since this is real life, he could break every single one. A flash of light lit up his eyes, and he jumped up, ready to break free from the game's rules and write his own destiny. His hand clenched the dagger tight, his pale yellow eyes burning with a cold, determined fire that showed he was ready to strike. "They're here," he whispered with a quick grin, feeling like a coiled spring ready to snap as he leaped up, his dagger flashing in the light, while the gray-robed figures in the distance finally came into focus. The cloaked man with the bushy mustache roared in anger, spotting his target. As soon as the order was shouted, the whole team in gray cloaks rushed forward like a blizzard, their spears held straight and ready. The young man with gray-purple hair didn't even pause before charging right at the guy with the spear, acting just like a wild animal with nowhere else to go. The man in the cloak, sporting wild sideburns, sneered at us, thinking he was all alone and calling us idiots. The cloaked man with thick sideburns believed he had won, but the young man with gray-purple hair growled in his head, "You're dead." His eyes flashed, making the whole world seem to slow down as he took a quick blink at the target 8.7 meters away, a split second that could change everything. The cold dagger sliced through the air, making the cloaked spear-wielder's eyes go wide in shock as the man with the mutton chop stared in disbelief, wondering how such a clumsy move could be so fast. He stepped forward without a sound, drove the cold dagger deep into the enemy, and dealt a swift, deadly blow like lightning. The cloaked man spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, his body jerking with agony as life quickly slipped away from him. Blood sprayed across his face, yet his pale yellow eyes stayed ice-cold even as his heart hammered with the rhythm of survival. He squeezed the dagger so hard against the hill, feeling the wild pulse of its life force, driven only by the raw need to survive. Feeling his own blood pulse under his fingertips, he told himself there was no regret because he only killed to stay alive. He pulled the dagger out with a sharp movement, the enemy fell, and he did it only to stay alive, no more and no less. He didn't pause to think, instead, he shot forward like an arrow, the wind howling past his ears as he raced toward whatever fate awaited him. Another hooded figure rushed at him, but he slipped past, leaving the blow just inches away. He threw such a hard punch that all the cloaked figures stumbled and fell down. The man with the bushy sideburns and his friends were terrified by this useless guy, wondering how he could be so strong. A cloaked figure shouted in surprise and anger as the man broke free and ran away. The young man with gray-purple hair sprinted as hard as he could, breathing in shaky gasps, because the chase was still far from over. He had just taken down one enemy, but the battle was far from over, and his heart was filled with a nagging question, what do I do next? Suddenly, the room went eerily quiet, and he held his breath while his sharp eyes scanned left and right, wondering if the cloaked figures had finally given up on chasing him. Suddenly, a shadow darted by and a hooded stranger stepped right in front of him, showing the gray-haired youth that the chase was far from over. Magic again, he ground out, his muscles screaming in pain but his spirit still fighting, knowing that as long as he could dodge, he still had a shot. Just then, he stumbled and cursed, feeling his balance suddenly slip away. Now, two shadowy figures in cloaks both let out a mighty roar, and magic explodes from the staffs in their hands. A bright light exploded outward as a glowing magic circle appeared under the cloaked figure's feet, showing that a scary attack was coming. Fierce flames swallowed everything, launching the young man with his gray-purple hair high into the air. He groaned in agony as the scorching heat and crushing force of the explosion tore right through him. The angry fire burst up like a huge light pillar, knocking him away and leaving his body spinning wildly through the air. Damn it! What do I do? He thought, his eyes wide with panic as time ran out. Suddenly, a flash of light hit his mind, and he looked right at the broken ice cliff and said, "That's it." The young man with gray-purple hair, driven by iron determination, reached out as if trying to catch a fragile hope. Suddenly, a blazing ball of light popped into existence and shattered with such force that the ground beneath us trembled violently. Thick smoke, swirling dust, and rising heat blocked out the sight, leaving nothing but a broken and empty place after the blast. Through the thick smoke, a heavy boot stepped down on the cracked ice, showing someone had arrived. The old man with the thick mustache sneered, "That arrogant kid deserves it," as snow kept falling and covered the empty scene in white. He peered down into the endless pit where smoke and dust still swirled, showing that they had defeated the enemy. Suddenly, a chill of unease took hold, his eyes narrowed in suspicion, and a doubtful, "Huh?" slipped from his lips. From the deep dark, a figure shot upward like lightning, glowing with a bright light, while the cloaked man cried out in horror, his face pale and eyes wide with shock at what he saw. In that moment, Baek-Yusul's eyes burned with resolve as he gritted his teeth, channeling every ounce of his strength into the attack, knowing that Blink's power surged right before it struck. A sharp blink sound echoed as he vanished and instantly reappeared before another cloaked figure, slashing with a cold blade that tore through the air. A desperate scream tore through the air, blood splattered everywhere, and the other cloaked figures stood frozen in shock, wondering what had just happened. Without a second's wait, he drove his blade through the foe, mixing magic and blood to turn the white snow red as the victim's final scream was abruptly silenced. The hooded man with his bushy sideburns saw what was happening and his face twisted in pure horror and anger. Thud. He dragged the blade free and the cloaked figure crumpled onto the snow, dead, while he gasped for air, sweat dripping down his brow, yet his eyes still burned with determination despite his exhaustion. He whispered that only two foes remained, scanning the two hooded shapes before him, one of whom was the old man with the long whiskers. "I have to finish this before the other two catch up," he thought, gripping his dagger tight as he waited for the next attack. The old man in the cloak, sporting wild sideburns, stared at him with wide eyes and said, "You're strange, and your speed is way too fast for a mage," before questioning his very nature while realizing that unlike the safety of the virtual world, real life meant everything or nothing. He knew he couldn't keep running forever as the enemy closed in, and with time slipping away, every step he took meant a new choice. He didn't even think about it, he lunged right at the hooded stranger because he knew he had to make this fight end fast. The cloaked man sneered and drew his sword, thinking the young man was just a simple target with only a blink skill and a dagger. The old man held his sword tight, sure that guarding his weak spots would keep the dagger at bay, while the young man stared back with eyes burning with fierce resolve. The cloaked man charged like a blizzard, his icy sword glowing brightly. "You dare come at me," the old man roared, blasting an icy wave meant to freeze everything in its path. Right then, a flash of light appeared, and he used his blink to vanish from the old man's sight. The icy wave crashed through the air, only to find nothing there because the enemy had disappeared. The cloak man laughed in victory, thinking he'd caught his victim and would slowly torture him, but a sharp, cold dagger had already pierced him, causing a groan to escape and his eyes to widen in shock. From behind, he looked like a ghost as the blade slashed through, causing the cloaked man to turn his head in shock. The icy sword slipped from his grip and clattered onto the snow, the fatal blow already delivered. "Damn it," the old man growled, grinding his teeth in shock after seeing the man who was just fleeing like a rat now standing over him with a knife, his mind hazy but his heart full of pride at last proving himself no longer the weakling he once was. Baek-Yusul's lips curled into a contemptuous smile as he had seized every chance to train and grow stronger, while the cloaked man roared in anger with his face twisted in resentment, gripping an icy sword that glowed with killing intent and chasing Becky forward like a blur across the snow to finally kill him. He lunged forward with two shiny daggers, his eyes sharp and cold, moving like a ghost through the snow thanks to his blink skill. The cloaked man swung his sword, sending a wave of ice flying as he braced himself for the enemy's next move. Baek skillfully dodged the attack, twisting his body like a death dancer while keeping his eyes locked on the danger. He blinked forward, popping up behind his opponent, but realized that charging ahead means risking a counterstrike, so he quickly figured out that his enemy is baiting him into blocking a spear thrust at the front while the real danger sneaks up on his side. The cloaked figure spun quickly, his icy sword meeting Becky's dagger in a clash that rang out through the freezing air as he vowed to stop her from reaching her goal. The cloaked man sneered with confidence, signaling he'd switch to my side so I could watch his opponent's every move. He swung his sword to the side, slicing through the air with a cold rush, but when he looked for Beckus, the spot was empty and the man in the cloak stood frozen, staring with wide eyes in total shock. He scanned the room in panic with a pale face, sensing a terrible feeling that he just couldn't ignore. A sharp, icy blade tore through his chest, sending bright red blood onto the white snow as he finally understood that he had been hunting me all along. After a desperate fight to the death, the game suddenly shouted that he had leveled up and unlocked a new story with extra rewards, but the young man was too weak to stand and only managed to collapse onto the freezing snow. He sucked in air with a gasp that felt like it tore his chest apart, his hazy yellow eyes staring into nothing while his body ran dry and empty. His blood-stained hand shook next to the red dagger, even though he had won, because the fight still made his whole body tremble. He breathed hard, his sharp eyes darting around as if hunting for a hidden danger, before letting out a careful sigh. At the cloaked man's feet, his still body lay in the snow, a pool of fresh red blood marking a sad end to his life. He pressed his lips together to fight off the spinning world, and even though it felt like a nightmare, the harsh truth was undeniable. Memories of the battle surged back, bringing the shock of his first use of blink, his first fight, and the heavy weight of taking a life. Even though he had survived, the price he paid was far too high. His fist was so tight his nails cut into his palm, and though his body ached, his tired yellow eyes burned with a cold light, forcing him to remember that killing was the only way to survive. He quickly wiped the dried blood from his arm, trying to wash away the battle scars, but couldn't ignore the deep wounds in his soul as he stood up to look at the corpse and realized that escaping this death trap was his top priority. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, his hazy eyes widening slightly as if he had just realized something important. He spun around hard and stopped, whispering, "Wait," as a gut feeling told him not to miss anything, his brows furrowing in thought while he muttered to himself that he hated the idea but had no choice but to be practical since he was broke, so he started rummaging through the body. He patted the body and discovered a shimmering pouch filled with gold coins worth about 2 million credits, which was certainly better than nothing. A young man with gray-purple hair stood frozen in the snow, soaked in blood and clutching a money pouch while a terrible blizzard tore apart the icy island around him. His bloodied feet sank deep into the thick snow as he stood on the shaky cliff edge, staring down into the endless dark where snow covered everything and the wind screamed. A voice called out in the wind, making him turn his head in surprise and wonder who was speaking. He gazed into the distance, where a group of people waved as they shouted, "We're here." A rookie guide led mages as a group of cloaked figures and a horse-drawn carriage emerged on the far side of the chasm. The silver-haired mage waved loudly to ask if the young man could cross the nearby bridge, and he eagerly said yes, prompting the brown-haired mage to tell his friends to wait while the blue-haired mage doubted the kid's ability to handle such a dangerous drop. "Huh!" The young man with gray-purple hair threw himself forward, jumping across the gap while his body burst into a bright golden glow. He touched down safely on the other side, glowing with golden light and leaving the group of mages stunned. The group of gray-cloaked mages stood frozen, whispering in shock as they tried to figure out what had just happened, wondering if it was some kind of leap magic. The light red-haired mage, looking confused, spoke up and said, "That was Blink," while the blue-haired mage with glowing purple eyes stared at Beckus in puzzlement. The light red-haired mage kept questioning with doubtful eyes, wondering if that was really Blink, since Blink never lets you choose where or how far you go. Beckus touched down with a solid thud, bathed in golden light, even as the team stood frozen in shock. A light red-haired mage gasped in surprise, "Oh," while Bew stared into the distance at two shadowy figures in black cloaks flickering in and out, wondering if they belonged to that group, only for the mage to cry out again with her eyes locked on a single spot. A purple-robed wizard stepped forward, whispering a spell until a wild burst of fire swirled into a glowing magic circle on the ground. Magic burst into a massive river of fire rushing at Busel just as the mages shouted, "Hey, watch out." Beal spun around in sudden fear, his face tight with shock as he saw the attack coming. He quickly chanted a spell, golden light flaring up again as he cursed and vanished with a whoosh. He barely dodged a stream of fire that rushed past him, leaving a blinding trail of light in its wake. Bekkill stood alone in the broken land, with falling rocks and his smoldering fire magic still burning around him. He stared at his attackers with cold, sharp eyes, wondering if they were just a group of hired soldiers. This isn't good, he thought, knowing his teleportation was locked for another 3 seconds, a dangerous delay that left him unable to dodge the coming strike. Time didn't wait, so he had to grab another rock fast or fall into the bottomless dark. The young man's pale yellow eyes snapped with intense focus, every sense tuned as sharply as a taut string. From the empty darkness, a blast of evil magic exploded and spun like a deadly whirlwind straight at him. He ducked just in time as the purple energy shot past him, ripping through the air and shaking everything around it. He let out a weak groan as his body shook from the force of the blast, leaving him dizzy even after he had managed to dodge the direct hit. The rock under his feet gave way and shattered, leaving him flailing in midair with nowhere to stand as he plummeted toward the dark abyss while letting out a desperate cry. He didn't even think twice before twisting his body in the air, desperate to find something to hold on to. Damn it, the floating rocks were too far away to grab, leaving us in a truly hopeless mess. With his teeth clenched and eyes blazing with focus, he gathered every ounce of strength, used his blink ability to vanish, and reappeared instantly right at the rock. He grabbed the rock's edge with a strong hand, surviving a deadly moment with a desperate but successful effort. He gasped for air and hauled himself up, muttering a whisper of relief that vanished the moment a huge fire erupted behind him and burned away all hope. Hellfire burst out behind him, burning it all away, while the young man with gray-purple hair held tight to the cliff, his eyes wide with terror as he stared down into the glowing red hole below. Death was right there, and he felt it clearly, whispering, "I'm going to die," like a final echo in the fiery space. All of a sudden, a bright blue light began swirling in the air like a powerful, old magic spell. The scary blue light smashed into the fire, causing a huge explosion that threw everything everywhere. Through the swirling smoke, dust, and broken ice, the scene slowly opened up to show a huge, snow-covered plain where two cloaked figures stood. The purple-haired youth was thrown back against the cliff, shivering in the blizzard and wondering in shock how some guy could fire an ice spear with lightning using no mana for such a perfect shot. Far away, a group of robed mages waited by a carriage, where a young woman with light blue hair and an ice staff stood firm in the snow, her cold and powerful presence shining through. Two other mages in the group shook with fear and shouted, "No way," as if they had just seen something truly amazing. Suddenly, the young man dropped into the abyss again, his desperate scream bouncing through the freezing air. He fell fast, a tiny speck against the bright white snow and dangerous cliffs. Fortunately, he grabbed onto a rocky ledge, sighed with relief, and spotted the mage group below before landing safely to face two cloaked figures, wondering what wild adventure would come next. The moment he hit the soft white snow safe and sound, the gray-purple-haired young man found himself staring down two hooded mages, his mind flashing with a sudden shout of surprise. He stepped forward, forced a smile, and quickly thanked the light blue-haired mage for saving his life, saying, "Excuse me, thank you for helping me." But the light blue-haired mage turned her back coldly and said, "I don't need your thanks," leaving the gray-purple-haired young man staring blankly and awkwardly as she walked away. He thought to himself that her voice was breathtakingly beautiful, yet her difficult attitude left him disappointed and curious. His eyes lit up with the resolve of someone who had just managed to shake off his chasers. A brutal scene flashed in his mind, showing plundered villages and fires reaching for the sky, while newspapers labeled the attackers ruthless bandits. But the terrifying reality was that the dark magic church was pulling the strings behind most of these disasters, hiding a sinister power in the shadows. But it's all over, he told himself as he stood on the shaky edge of the cliff, knowing that once he crossed this point, he would be safe in the Mage's land and finally free from the dark church's grip. He wore a confident smirk, knowing they had no clue who he was or where he came from, which gave him a huge advantage. Suddenly, a loud ding broke the silence as a bright blue quest panel floated into view before his eyes. The quest panel flashed with Chapter 2, Enroll in Stella Academy, marking a brand new challenge and a fresh path forward. "This is Chapter 2, he muttered with a startled look, thinking it would be easy, until a shock hit him as he silently screamed, "How can I go back to school at this age?" while worry deepened on his face. That night, the mage's carriage rolled along the snowy road under a faint crescent moon, carrying the gray-purple-haired young man in a restless sleep as his head leaned against the side, his mind drifting between nightmares and memories until he softly groaned, calling out his mother's name in the dark. Deep in the memories, a boy with bright eyes, clutching his book, joyfully called out to his mother. The boy promised to become a mage, and his mother's warm smile and gentle words showed him that his dream, saved for with care in an old magic book, was something he could truly reach. In the old library, the boy read every book he could find, driven by a fierce desire to study hard, repay his parents' kindness, and make them proud. The mother gently tucked the sleeping boy, who had drifted off while reading, into a dream where magic was still possible, but then a dark shadow fell, turning her smile into worry as she called the doctor, who delivered the grim verdict, a mana leak that meant certain death for any mage. His innocent golden eyes went wide with shock as the boy couldn't believe the cruel truth he'd just heard, thinking there had to be no way it could be real. Tears poured down his face, wetting his clothes, as the young man with gray-purple hair wondered if he was remembering Becky or feeling his own pain, until the boy sobbed uncontrollably and questioned whether this heavy sadness belonged to him or to someone else sharing his body. Shocked awake, the gray and purple-haired young man's eyes flew open, and the painful memories that haunted him still lingered. With a throbbing headache, he clutched his temples to block out the scary visions while a hooded figure watched him from behind. The pain faded, yet tiredness lingered in his weary golden eyes, which gazed forward with a deep sense of worry. The first light of day spilled through the carriage window, turning the snowy mountains pink as he quietly wished it were still night. The pain faded, yet exhaustion kept his golden eyes heavy and worried as the pink dawn light painted the snowy peaks, and a grey-cloaked mage with blue hair gently told him, "I saw you stir," while the rumbling wheels kept them rolling forward into the unknown. The convoy came to a halt in the white snow, where the grey-cloaked mages chose to rest and let their presence break the morning silence. Bakuseo stretched to shake off the tiredness from his restless sleep, his eyes still half-drowsy. The golden mage's sleepy eyes suddenly sharpened as she stood silently, her light blue hair framing a face that held secrets, watching him intently like a hunter spotting prey. He raised an eyebrow in confusion, wondering why this woman seemed so unfriendly, as a big question mark appeared in his mind. The mage didn't say another word, just turned away with her cloak dancing in the cold wind, leaving him to his own thoughts. He chuckled to himself, thinking she's a real tough nut to crack, though everything is still going smoothly. In the world of ether, where magic and machines walk together, people zoom from place to place on trains, float above in airships, or vanish in an instant through glowing teleportation gates. The group rode on toward Rozoa, a big city where they'd hop on the next airship to keep their journey going. Rozoa was just a brief stop on the journey to Arcanium, the famous magical city where the real adventure began. Arcanium collected magic towers, knight orders, and 5 prestigious mages, but the crown jewel among them was Stella Academy. At Stella Academy, where the world's richest and most powerful families gathered, he couldn't believe how a useless kid like Bekkiel could even walk through those doors. All at once, a vital memory flashed in his mind, urging him to take stock of the powers he held. The skill window popped open, showing Manali's constitution at level 1 with a small boost, while also unlocking the 6th sense and speeding up his perception. He stared in awe, realizing that only these 2 powers kept him alive this long, because without them, he would have been dead long ago. But the Manali constitution was a cruel curse that stopped the body from holding mana, effectively dooming every mage to death. And that was the terrible curse Bakus was born with, a cruel fate that never let him go. Ironically, his tough body helped him feel the magic around him, letting him dodge attacks without even needing to see them. When danger strikes, his mind suddenly speeds up, making the world seem to slow down so he can react instantly. Even though it was powerful, using his 6th sense drained his mind so much that it hurt, so he knew he had to stop and check his numbers before trying again. A panel of stats popped up showing his strength, perception, and agility, which were decent for a beginner and left him with 10 experience points to spend. He raised an eyebrow, wondering if the massive jump in Bekus's game vision meant he'd somehow inherited powers from his own character. In either, growing stronger wasn't about your character's level alone, but how much a skill or star stat you had unlocked. The game offered a 9-star peak, but it felt like a dream since even after 10 years of playing, he had only ever touched 8 stars in strength and perception. So he chose to boost his instincts and reflexes first, leaving his muscles and agility for someone else to fix later. With a gentle touch, his perception level shot up to 2 stars, and he nodded with a smile, happy to take that small but important step forward. The most urgent task was upgrading his Mana League constitution to a pure angelic state right away, forcing him to step into the Stella Academy, the only place that could stop the apocalypse and cure the curse. He let out a heavy sigh, shaking at the thought of the long road ahead, because even just imagining it made him feel defeated, and right now, anything useful would be a lifesaver. Suddenly, a ding echoed out, bringing up a strange new message that left him wondering what it meant. A grey-cloaked mage shouted, "Let's go," and he jumped, quickly answering, "Yes, I'm coming." He had to ignore the strange notification and keep walking, melting into the crowd as he stepped toward his destiny. The mage with light blue hair hid under her cloak and silently watched him walk away, her eyes showing nothing. Under a bright blue sky, a huge airship sailed smoothly, holding everyone's dreams and future inside it. Inside the fancy cabin, a voice announced that the airship to Arcanium is leaving, and a group of proud nobles listened. The purple-haired man sneered around the room with eyes full of disdain. The purple-haired man smirked as he watched the newcomer gawk like a fool, clearly out of his element on the airship. Bekkiel frowned in annoyance when the insults finally reached his ears. The purple-haired guy kept grumbling that Stella Academy was a disgrace for accepting commoners, claiming it ruined the world's most famous school. He stayed quiet, his fuzzy yellow eyes hiding deep thoughts. A sigh slipped out from him as he grew tired of the noble's arrogance, his face showing clear signs of weariness. He turned his back and walked away, ignoring the insults, which made the purple-haired guy growl in anger and demand, "Hey, did you just ignore us?" The noble ground his teeth in rage while the purple-haired man snarled about a bastard and demanded that Becky's sales stop, all while people around them whispered and chattered constantly. What the hell? Why is it suddenly so noisy? The purple-haired guy snapped as he turned his head, his face twisted in annoyance and irritation. His eyes went wide in shock as a girl with snowy pink-tipped hair and a bright red bow glided past, looking like a true princess. A hesitant voice suddenly spoke from Princess Hungain, leaving Beale so shocked he could only stammer, "Huh? Did they just say Hongben?" In Bekis's mind, a picture of a graceful young woman appeared, the princess of the Apollo kingdom, Hongbin Apollo. The proud princess kept walking with her long hair dancing in the air as the crowd around her whispered in admiration and awe. The purple-haired guy bowed fast, forced a smile, and stammered, "Your Highness," while the princess's fiery red eyes swept over him cold as ice, making him shrink back in fear. She kept walking, ignoring him as her long hair danced in the breeze, leaving the purple-haired guy standing there, stunned and unable to speak. Light footsteps echoed as Princess Hung Beyond glided past the crowd toward the stairs, while Beck stood there watching her back. The princess halted and turned to stare at Bekis with fiery red eyes that held a mystery he could not read, while he stood frozen under the weight of her intense gaze. So, this is the evil woman of this world, Buse thought, staring at her with a determined look. Hungbin, a major character in the game, had fought against the girl protagonist many times before. Across many different endings, she was always doomed to a tragic fate, sometimes meeting a brutally violent death. Hungban stood alone in the library, haunted by a cruel fate that seemed to curse her with endless tragedy, whether she was ostracized and expelled from school or forced to endure such humiliation that she could barely lift her head. The gray-purple-haired guy stared at her, thinking, "I've heard she looks like she could handle any guy, and she's stunning, but her face says she's tough to approach, so if I talk to her, I might get cut up." Suddenly, his stomach let out a loud rumble, jolting him out of his daydream and pulling him back to the real world. The guy spun around and walked off with a sudden idea, "So hungry. Maybe I should go find something to eat." As he looked ahead, a shiny stall piled high with tempting sweets stood there, sending a sweet smell his way that made his stomach rumble even louder. He clutched an empty cup, his face twisted in shock as he muttered that the prices were outrageous before sighing and stepping out, deciding that he'd just have to wait until Arcanium to eat. A sharp electronic buzz was followed by a notification chime that made him jump, and he wondered what was going on. A gray-haired woman with a dignified look spoke in a formal voice and asked the esteemed passengers to pay attention. The blue-haired girl paused her book to listen, and as the announcement went on, she knew something big was coming. A dark-haired girl wearing a black bow in her hair leaned forward with wide, eager eyes as she listened closely. A sharp-dressed man in a red suit sat in his chair, turning his ear toward the announcement as the airship arrived at Arcanium in 10 minutes, making him swallow hard with focused eyes since he knew this moment was the start of everything. He took a deep breath, told himself that this was his new reality and he would face it, and his face showed a steely determination. Busel stood still with a dark mood around him, his mind filled with heavy thoughts. He sighed, telling himself it was good to face everything, but a shadow of unease still lingered on his face. B's hazy yellow eyes brimmed with worry as he wondered if he could survive at Stella Academy. No, he couldn't, for visions of dark dragon power and shadowed sorcerers flooded his mind, drowning him in a cruel question. Can I survive in this world? As he glanced out the window, he secretly wished for something useful to appear right now. Suddenly, a flash of light in his eyes reminded him not to forget the unread notification waiting for him. A system window popped up with 3 rewards, and Becky smirked as he thought, that system actually has a conscience, huh? He hoped to unlock amazing powers like bringing someone back to life or shining a bright light, but the system said they were too strong and would get a major downgrade. Busel kept asking about hyperspace teleportation, but since it was a special upgrade that nobody could get, he frowned and muttered, "Seriously, do I always have to get stuck with the weaker version?" The system told him his power wasn't enough to make the story move forward, and when Bekis asked in shock, the system said that was exactly what his plot power was supposed to do. He summed it up, "I'm just too new to this game to find those rare veteran items." Bake UCL thought hard, his eyes calculating everything. Suddenly, a bright idea struck him, making the warbler glasses seem like the perfect choice after the system confirmed they were possible, so Bekis reached out and a pair of glasses appeared in his hand. Bekis picked up the warbler glasses, never imagining he'd actually use them one day to store all the monster data he'd collected in the game, since the Ether world didn't let players keep such information themselves. He slipped on the glasses, and a dry click sounded like a brand new door swinging open. His normally cloudy eyes suddenly shined with a bright light, as his warbler glasses, a magical pair that saved everything he ever saw, from dinner conversations to bank account numbers, worked hard to record every single detail with just a tiny bit of effort. He focused hard and shouted an order, and suddenly a blue virtual screen popped into view right in front of his eyes to open the Warbler folder, which led straight to a huge pile of useful knowledge. Inside, there were endless neatly labeled folders holding everything from alchemy ingredients and monster data to hunting spots, dangerous dungeons, and even your character's own secrets. Familiar icons popped up, bringing back memories of his long hours grinding in the game, so he muttered to himself, "All right, that's enough." Now that the game world was real, he wasn't sure if his old grinding tricks would still work, but with the Warbler glasses, he could at least get half his lost power back. Suddenly, a voice caught his attention and made him look up, and he realized it was Isel. Amidst the whispers, a blue-haired young woman named Isel, the eldest daughter of the traitorous Duke Morph, walked by. Isel kept her face calm even as the cruel whispers around her asked how she dared to be seen there and warned her to stay quiet so she wouldn't hear them. Becky gazed at the girl's fading figure while the name Isel echoed softly in his mind. He adjusted his glasses, and a blue flash revealed that the Warbler could see and show details about anyone. All the secrets about Eel Morph were revealed, telling the story of a lightning and ice mage, the eldest daughter of Duke Morph, who would lose her father, see her family fall apart, and eventually pass away. What? She's the fake heroine? He stood frozen, realizing he had to figure out Isel's true nature before everything else. Even though he was playing in Etherworld, he knew the game was based on the romance novel Don't Love the Unfortunate Grand Duke's Daughter, where the heroine lost her father and her whole family. She walked into the magic school, battled the villain Hong Bien's tricks, grew stronger, and finally found the male lead. After her revenge plan was scrapped and the male heroes stepped in to protect them, the story ended so sadly that readers were furious and the book got terrible reviews, while the purple-haired young man with glasses stayed quiet with a thoughtful look in his hazy eyes. But even though this game took place in the book's world, it told a totally new story centered on an original heroine named Flame, an ordinary modern girl who suddenly woke up inside her favorite book. Unlike the original story where Isel was the true heroine, in the game she was only a fake version while Flame held the real role, forcing Isel to die and come back to life again and again despite everyone's desperate attempts to save her, yet this young man simply took off his Warbler glasses to reveal his pale yellow eyes of indifference and suddenly spotted a familiar light blue-haired girl in a long cloak walking through the crowd, drawing all the whispers around her. The young man slipped his glasses back on to hide his tired eyes before getting off the vehicle, sure he had been mistaken. The car came to a halt right before Stella Academy of Magic, an ancient fortress tucked away among towering mountains where learning and spells mixed together. Hundreds of students in dark blue uniforms gathered together, each one unique but united by a burning desire to master magic. Up on the high platform, the ancient headmaster began his speech, his voice booming solemnly and filling the grand hall. He talked about the dark mages who chose to wander into forbidden lands, turning into monsters and tearing open secret gates to swallow the magical world in darkness. The headmaster's voice echoed of our duty to shield the world from darkness, yet beneath the crowd, whispers of boredom began to rise as the first day's lecture dragged on. Then, the headmaster announced the new student representative, and the 4 top students stepped up to the platform to take the oath. As hundreds watched with pride, 5 names were called and 5 young men and women stepped onto the platform, every single one radiating a special energy. 5 of the Academy's brightest stars, including the villainous Hun Jen and 4 promising heroes, all glowed with a dazzling light like brilliant stars in the night sky. The purple-haired young man watched with hazy eyes, thinking to himself that everyone looked so handsome and beautiful they seemed to be hogging all the good looks. The young man with purple hair and hazy yellow eyes suddenly sparkled with a strange light, making him stand out above everyone else. That was Mayong, the new student rep who was a genius, a heartthrob loved by thousands, topped his class, and oozed pure charm. The purple-haired young man watched quietly and whispered to himself, "This is Maung, the supreme Mayong, a genius hero with the power to master all elements and become a god." Even if he couldn't save everything, the purple-haired young man told himself, he had to pull him toward justice, because otherwise a terrible end awaited. But the war's true leader turned out to be the heroine known as Flame. The purple-haired guy frowned, worrying that if Flame is a transmigrator like him, they could all team up to lie. But if she thinks I'm the enemy and pushes me away, everything will get messy, he told himself, knowing that while she got stuck in a romance novel, he had landed in a game of the same kind, so there was no point in taking unnecessary chances since he knew the story better than she did. "Well, I'll just do my best," he muttered, clicking his tongue, "since I'm nothing but a side character, far less important than even a village NPC." The heroine Flame held a secret power that could cleanse the corruption of dark mages. But she also had another terrifying ability that drained the life force from anyone nearby, making the purple-haired boy shiver as he realized that getting too close would surely make him the next victim. He told himself he could only support the heroes from behind and stay far away, but as loud applause filled the air and the ceremony ended with joy, a system message popped up declaring his registration at Stella Academy complete. Stella Academy, a huge fortress of stone, stood tall and proud under a deep blue sky while white clouds drifted lazily past its towering spires and strong walls, making it feel both grand and mysterious. In a big hall bathed in warm golden light, new students in neat uniforms sat up straight while the purple-haired young man named Busale quietly turned his back with a distant look in his eyes. Becchio muttered to himself, wondering how long it had been since he graduated from university and found himself back as a high school student again. What a strange thing it was. His eyes seemed far away as he quietly thought about his new life at the fancy Stella Academy. A hand gently cradled the golden watch while Beck grinned to himself, thinking, anyway, I'm really proud of this thing. The Stella pocket watch was a mark of power that made any student at the famous Stella Academy look more respected than even a warrior mage with their special license. The Bake Sale buzzed with excitement as he whispered to himself, I can't wait to try it, I want to go out and explore, feeling a fresh rush of energy surging through him. A dry clack echoed and the carved wooden door swung open, breaking the quiet lecture hall silence to show that something was about to begin. An old man with a scar on his face walked in and looked around, ordering everyone to sit down and put away their things except for pens, while he announced a surprise test that had to start right after the opening ceremony, leaving Beckill shocked. At Stella Academy, the classes were tougher than most Korean universities, and they even gave a test on the very first day. The gray-haired man explained that the test would decide his class, then declared it was time to start, and as an odd sound echoed, a paper filled with strange magical symbols appeared on the desk, leaving Beckus looking thoroughly confused. Vakel frowned at the paper, let out a sigh, and muttered that he didn't understand a word of it, feeling trapped in a terrible mess. Unlike the famous hard entrance exam, this placement test sorted students into classes from F to A, with S being the top spot, while a blonde girl carefully worked through her questions. Most of the main characters ended up in S class, and Hung-Yeon stood serious in her white and pink streak, while Bake, the last of 1,141 new students, thought about just handing in a blank paper since he knew he'd be stuck in class F anyway. B's hazy yellow eyes darted with a flicker of thought. In the big classroom, Becky Soul sat with his chin resting on his hand, staring blankly at the empty test paper. He stretched with a big yawn, his blank face suddenly filled with the thought of Maung. Busale thought to himself, that genius must be just as tired of this test as I am. Mao Yong had finished all the questions, his pen resting on the blank page as Bayes chuckled, no wonder life feels so boring to a genius like Muzang, whose brilliant mind and incredible talents make everything too easy. The future of Mei Yuzheng, whether he would fight for good or turn to evil, hung entirely on what the female lead did next. The Dark Sorcerers Guild's threat to destroy humanity would surely pique his curiosity, drawing a sneering Maung with blazing red eyes and dark magic surging around him. Vuzel sighed, figuring Maung's biggest trouble was still his family, before yawning once more. He only felt worse when he looked at the genius's perfect test paper and saw his own blank one. Suddenly, a bright idea sparked. Maybe the Warbler glasses could hide the test, just like all those game library pages he'd read to sharpen his skills. Well, he might as well try, so Beale reached into his shirt and pulled out the Warbler glasses. Just as he pulled out the glasses, a tall figure suddenly appeared, making him wonder what kind of glasses those could be. The gray-haired man with a scar on his face asked, "Didn't I tell you to check the glasses beforehand?" while Becky, looking confused, seemed to think he had just heard something strange. The gray-haired teacher coldly snatched the Warbler glasses right out of Becky's hand. "I'll take a look." He quietly examined them, feeling a faint magic pulse from his finger as he probed the glasses, while the teacher looked deep in thought, hiding what she really felt. "I froze in a cold sweat, panicked that if he discovered the glasses were magic, I'd get kicked out right away." Amid his extreme panic, a strange electronic sound echoed in his head, leaving Beckus completely bewildered. The cold system offered a choice to grab Becky's lost glasses, but Becky screamed in his mind, begging him not to do it. The teacher with the wild, spiky hair locked his sharp eyes on the glasses, holding them there so long that time felt like it had stopped completely. Finally, he handed back the glasses and warned him, "I don't feel any magic, so be more careful next time," which made Beck sigh with relief because the glass was broken anyway. Beckus slid his glasses back on, watched a faint blue light flash, and with a sly grin, saw the answers magically appear before him, laughing in triumph as he scribbled down his victory while dreaming of skipping Class F and soaring into Class A. Suddenly, the teacher's icy voice crashed out like thunder, shouting, "Time's up, I'm taking the tests," leaving Beck frozen in shock. Before he could catch his breath, the test papers shot straight into the air and zoomed toward the teacher, and then he froze in panic, wondering what on earth was happening. The gray-haired teacher calmly gathered all the exams while Becca silently cried inside because he had only solved 3 questions. He gripped the pile of test papers so hard his face stayed blank while the whole room held its breath, nobody daring to make a sound. The teacher's eyes moved quickly over the students like she was judging each one, and the room grew so quiet it felt scary. The purple-haired boy with his glasses slowly crept up his nose, feeling heavy-hearted because even though he thought he had finally escaped Class F, he realized that maybe everything was still too much for Beckus to handle. Suddenly, a figure rushed forward, making Beckus lift his hazy yellow eyes in sudden surprise. "You handed me the glasses," and right away Teacher Lee Hanwell growled as his black-gloved hand reached out, leaving Beckus frozen with his heart pounding. He held the warbler glasses and checked every detail, but seeing no magic, he sighed, "Ridiculous," while the teacher frowned in doubt. Lee Hanwell pointed a finger at the crowd and shouted, "You there, get Professor Gryan," and as soon as a blonde student stood up and bowed, he took off running into the distance. Busel wondered what was going on, realizing that his carefully copied steps and answers might have been found out by the teacher. The classroom held its breath, the only sound being the echo of Beckel's question as he waited for Professor Gran's answer, feeling the heavy weight of pressure on his shoulders. A silver-haired old man with a scholarly look appeared, Professor Gryan, a master of magical tech, holding his glasses as a faint green magical light flashed. "Yes, the answer to this puzzle seems too suspicious," Professor Gryan said, shaking his head, "but there is no magic hidden in these glasses or in what the student owns." "I know for sure the student solved it on his own," Professor Gran declared, as Bayesale stood tall with a fearless and steady gaze. "Aha, that's interesting, life is all about learning," so Professor Gryan laughed, patted Beckel's shoulder, and turned to Professor Lee Hanwell to ask him to apologize and guide the boy, which Lee did with a nod. Teacher Lee Hanwell bowed with a complicated look and said he misunderstood, offering a sincere apology that finally made the tense air feel light again. Beckus felt a smug grin spread across his face, knowing he had cheated and that the glasses' secret was safe for now. "It's okay, just watch out next time," he said, but then a sneaky thought popped into his head, "as long as I don't get caught, I'm good." The bright morning sun warmed the gray tiles of the old school, making the big building look like a strong castle standing tall against the blue sky. The heavily carved wooden door with its strange sign hid many secrets, and a fresh start was waiting just beyond that threshold. The test paper, filled with old magical symbols, held the very first challenge of a new adventure. Lee Hanwell, the strict professor, flipped through each page with a sharp look, watching every move and idea of the students closely. A soft sound escaped him as his eyes widened in surprise, realizing the exam wasn't as easy as he had hoped. A warm voice called out, "Hello, Professor Lee Hanwell," as Professor Edelman stepped forward with a kind but sharp look to ask about the new student's test. This year felt full of promise, especially when Edelman's bright smile lit up the room and showed how much she hoped for the new generation. Lee Hanwell nodded quietly, knowing these seeds held something more than ordinary. From the mighty fire kingdom of Adelvit, Princess Hongyin Adalev stepped forward, carrying the Empire's burning pride. In the Scaraldan Empire, where magic ruled everything, the 12-year-old Jeremy Scarvin had already outshone his entire family to become the crown prince. From the mighty full moon magic tower, He Riang, the next great leader, carried the deep wisdom and powerful magic of the peak. "I heard it's quite hard to make questions for these top students, isn't it?" Edelman smiled, and Lee Hanwell nodded, saying this year's exam has some tricky questions. I felt relief wash over me as the professor gave a subtle, smug smirk while his eyes swept across the papers, making it clear he was completely satisfied with everything. His eyes were sharp as knives, watching closely to see who would rise to meet the challenge. As Adelman explained, this year's placement exam introduced a brand new kind of question, with the first 3 designed to trip up anyone who just relied on what they had learned before. They had 2 main goals, to see if students could skip stuck questions to keep going and to check if they could solve problems that weren't in the book. The days of relying only on learned spells were gone, replaced by fights that demanded quick thinking and clever moves on the spot. But a harsh truth emerged: those questions were unsolvable, leaving over 1,000 students with blank papers while only 3 perfect scores stood out against a sea of failure. First came Mayong, the genius of the century who arrived like a shooting star, followed by Flame, a regular student specially let in by the headmaster who was nearly as talented. And right at the end, there was Beale, a name that left everyone in total shock. Professor Lee Hanwell was baffled because Maung and Flame were already geniuses, yet Becky, who had the lowest entrance score, solved every single problem while he couldn't even crack one. Professor Edelman smiled, noting that Lee Hanwell's worry about the new test scores clearly meant one student was bothering him. She explained that even with endless formulas, these problems seemed impossible to solve, yet they could be fixed without knowing a single thing. Lee Hanwell asked with doubt if Beckiel was really a genius, and E. Deltman replied that maybe he was, or maybe it was just a lucky accident. He kept a thoughtful look on his face, his eyes moving across the old bookshelves while his mind wandered far away. Lee Hanwell looked totally confused as a big secret slowly began to reveal itself. He gripped a file containing Beckiel's picture and a note that said a special spot was open just because he could control blink, leaving Lee Hanwell wondering if this meant the student truly was different from everyone else. A smirk curled his lips as he realized this student was all about blinking. He promised himself that in time, he would finally know if this was just luck or if he was truly special. While other students chatted excitedly about the class results, a boy with strange green hair worried that his mom would be mad if he didn't get into Class A, and a purple-haired friend sighed that he had to check the real results himself instead of just clicking a button like in a game. Down the academy hall, students jostled for a spot as the glowing lists for classes C, D, E, and F appeared on the magic boards. A boy with green hair stood there with wide eyes, looking like he'd just found something totally unbelievable. In the middle of the crowd, a hush fell on everyone as they all turned to look at the purple-haired, gay-haired young man, and that was Vyuzol. The news spread fast, and when I heard he scored 0 on the magic entrance exam, I couldn't believe it. How could someone like him even get into Stella Academy? Beckus didn't care about the gossip, he just wanted to find his name, see which class he was in, and get out. He walked to the board with blurry eyes, secretly thinking the results didn't matter anymore. The purple-haired young man checked the list for his name in the lower classes, but with a confused frown, he couldn't find it anywhere, muttering that his name was simply not there. A wave of panic hit him, making him wonder if they'd failed him just because he only answered 3 questions, which seemed unbelievable and made him fear it was all over. Whispers rose around him again, filled with confusion and questions about why Beckus was there and if it was a strange mistake. Other students started talking about the strange situation, wondering how Yuslik, the son of Mark Chechovi who sits in Class A, and Kyle, who earned a perfect score but also ranks in Class A, could possibly be there. Becky frowned, sensing something was wrong, so he decided to check it out himself. He walked with firm purpose toward the board where the names of the very best were listed. His eyes went wide and his pupils shrank as he faced a terrifying truth or a miracle, realizing that Bo was now a name and a fate carved deep into the world's very heart. Becca stood frozen with wide eyes, shocked to see his own name on the top of the Class S list and wondering why he was even there. His normally cloudy yellow eyes were now wide with shock, wondering if any of this could actually be happening. Class S was the top honor at Stella Academy, a special group of just 41 amazing students that every other student dreamed of joining. Why am I being thrown into this bizarre class? He scratched his head, feeling totally out of his mind, knowing this wasn't a mistake and that he was now stuck having to work with the main character. Getting tangled up with him would only add more trouble to his already messy life, but since he's already in it, there's no going back now. He turned his back and walked away with purpose, deciding that from now on, he would try to live as far away from others as he possibly could. As his footsteps faded, he muttered to himself, trying to calm his nerves, it'll probably work out somehow, while a brown-haired girl in the noisy crowd quietly watched him go, her eyes full of confusion. As the darkness closed in and a strange new world of magic and mystery appeared, a white-haired girl trembled in pain as sharp crashes echoed around her in another room where she was being beaten. Professor Hongil, the fire expert, roared that you failed 3 questions while even Isomorph, the fallen girl, got 2 right, leaving you worse than bugs and ordered to restart as an insect. Tears rolled down Hunjian's cheeks as he choked out a painful, yes, mother. The white-haired professor stood tall, looking down with contempt at her kneeling daughter, while a heavy sigh of disappointment and hidden resentment filled the air. Hong Yil's icy stare cut through his kneeling daughter. Listen closely, Hong Bien. You must never become as wretched as I have. After being cast out of the kingdom, I was forced to take this humble professor's job, and I am told I must never let anyone bring shame to the land like I once did, words that felt like a sharp knife cutting right through my heart. Hung's proud shadow stretched out as she bent low, feeling a heavy, unseen weight press down on her. An icy iron hand forced Hong Bien's chin up, exposing the bruises on her face, while a cruel smirk twisted her lips into a promise that felt more like a curse than a blessing, demanding she surpass her older sister and grow stronger than ever. Do you understand, my daughter? Her voice rang out with a demanding tone, yet Hong Bian could only turn her face away, her deep wounds still visible. Yes, mother, he whispered weakly, his words as fragile as a thread about to snap. Left all by herself, she was drowned in pain and confusion until her voice turned to a whisper and her eyes went dead. Tears streamed down my face, soaking in the shame, because I only knew the lessons I'd been taught, missing out on the spells and secrets I never learned. Why? Why do you torment me like this, mother? She cried out, her voice sounding like a choked saw echoing through the silent room. Time marched on until a fresh door appeared, marked with the symbol of excellence, Class S. Inside the lecture hall, hundreds of students chattered so loudly they sounded just like a disturbed beehive. Bake UCL grabbed his head with a pained grimace, muttering that it was a total disaster to be stuck with such a strange bunch of high schoolers he had no desire to befriend. Everyone was whispering, staring at him with curious eyes as they wondered how he ended up in the class, which was confusing to him while Beckis just found the whole thing annoying. The whispering never stopped, and even the parents grumbled about Becale, but he just nodded coldly and said the school was right to keep him in class, leaving a male student to shake his head and call it ridiculous. The rumors flew around like a sealed fate for Becale, and though he sighed thinking he'd just become an outcast, his tired face told the truth. He knew that the people around him had spent years working hard, so it made sense they were mad at being stuck with a nobody like him, but Buzail knew that grades could still change after every test. Even Class S wasn't spared, yet falling to a lower rank was so shocking it had almost never happened before in the Academy's history. Suddenly, he recalled a boy from the poor classes who had somehow made it into Class S, a name that had faded from his memory but which he was certain he would find again soon. No matter what, it was still a mind-blowing sight to see these faces in real life, all the characters he had spent countless hours grinding for in a game that had suddenly come alive. Most of these top students would soon become famous heroes across the land, but 5 of them would turn against the magic world. And among the traitors was Ma Yusong, a name he would never forget. He looked all around him, hunting for a face he knew or a clue to what was destined to happen. He secretly hoped the girl could stop the tragedies from coming true, but right now he was just an outsider, powerless to change what fate had in store. The door swung open wide, and a man stepped inside, his deep voice bouncing through the room as he ordered, "Everyone sit down," while his steady walk made everyone turn to look at Becchio, who looked up with a surprised expression on his face. The man stepped up to the podium, scanning the room before saying, "It's great to meet you all, and for those who don't know me, let me introduce myself." With a stern face and eyes that cut like razors, Professor Lee Hanwell announced his name and his legendary record of hunting down thousands of dark mages, causing the students to whisper in awe before he silenced the hall with a single, commanding look to begin his 3-year course of tough training. No one spoke and no one moved, only a thick, heavy silence hung in the air that felt like it was about to crush them. "All right, then we shall," the professor began, but his words were cut short as the lecture hall door swung open and a graceful figure stepped in. A girl with long white hair tipped in pink and fiery red eyes suddenly appeared, so stunning that even the air seemed to stop moving. Beckis was so shocked he couldn't believe his eyes, while Hung, who always puts principles first, wondered if she could really be late and thought, "This is truly bizarre," as the white-haired girl stood opposite Professor Lee Hanwell, her proud stance just as commanding as his, creating a clash like 2 opposing poles yet both radiating an irresistible charm. "Byuzu."